conspiracy or no conspiracy, Oswald or no Oswald, if the Secret Service would have done their normal protective functions, Kennedy would have lived.
Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. And if you're new, then welcome. I'm Jess Cannell, and I would love to earn your subscription. Today, what I have for you is a really awesome interview with a longtime JFK researcher named Vince Palamara. We'll get into it in the interview, but he is a Secret Service expert when it comes to the day of 11/22/1963. Now, he knows about more than that, but that is his wheelhouse. And so we're going to have a conversation about the failures of the Secret Service that day, the various regulations that were violated, his three main suspects of who engaged in suspicious behavior that we should look more closely at, and just the things that he's learned throughout his research in the case. So you're in for a great conversation with someone who knows his stuff. And I learned so many things in this conversation. I know you will too. Let me know in the comments what you learn and what you appreciate about this conversation. And I hope you enjoy it. Vince Palamara, we are so excited to have you here on the channel. I know my viewers will be so excited to hear from you. We've actually just gone through a reading about the Secret Service, and I know that's your background. So tell us a little bit about how you got started with the JFK case in general, but then what led you to the work you've done with the Secret Service?
Great. Thanks, Jess. Yes, I'm 59 now. At the age of 12 in 1978, I really got interested in President Kennedy and his assassination. Had a lot to do with timing. My mom and dad, big fans of President Kennedy, and they were very much touched by his tragic death. And how this came about is I was a big collector of foreign stamps and coins and domestic. And whenever I'd come across an image of Kennedy, I was fascinated that foreign stamps had so many images of Kennedy. They'd say, oh, he was such a wonderful president, a wonderful man. And they were so, like, dad told me where he was when Kennedy was shot, etc. At the same time, keep in mind, this is 1978, the House Select Committee, the second major government investigation and assassination was going on. So the nightly news would have all these little snippets of tantalizing pro-conspiracy testimony and whatnot. PBS hearings had Dr. Humes and other people. And another thing too, people might say, Vince, why did you get into the Secret Service? That makes sense, House Select Committee and your parents, whatnot, 1978. Well, the other thing was a fictional show on the Secret Service, the Wild Wild West, still my favorite to this day. So I was always interested in the Secret Service. So when I would look at films and photos of President Kennedy in life and also during the assassination, I'd almost look past him and look, oh, that agent looks familiar. Hey, I've seen him before, and so on and so forth. But for the first 10 or so years, I was mainly just secondary sources, reading a ton of books, anything I could get my hands on in the, from the late 70s through to the late 80s and whatnot. But what really did for me, my coming out party, so to speak, with the case was in 1991, Professor Jerry Rose had a journal called The Third Decade, later The Fourth Decade. And in front of roughly 60 or so seasoned authors and researchers, I was like 25 at the time, just turned 25. And I gave a largely secondary source paper on the Secret Service, an overview. And people came up to me, they were really went over tremendously with the audience, and people like Robert Cutler, Harry Livingstone, George Michael Weaver were coming to me and saying, Vince, you're onto something here. You got to look at the Secret Service. To be honest with you, I never really thought twice the Secret Service. As Robert Groden's famous for saying is, I guess that's why they call the Secret Service secret. I never really thought twice about them, in the beginning years and whatnot. Well, then I started to find, keep in mind, this is largely before the internet. There was computer bulletin boards, but for most intents and purposes, the internet didn't exist to most people. So it was largely through directory assistance, a little bit of luck, old newspapers via microfiche and whatnot. And I found a lot of these gentlemen. A lot of them have since passed away. A lot of them lived in Washington, Maryland, area, and some in Florida and whatnot. And I started to find things that just did not make sense with official history. And most people know that author David Lifton, The Best Evidence, his big coming out party, so to speak, is when he got the cybernear report. It said there was surgery of the head area. For me, September 27th, 1992 is a date will live in infamy. I spoke to the head of the White House detail, Gerald Bain, B-E-H-N. Again, it's the number one agent of Kennedy's detail, not some buck private. And I was running some things past him. He was a pretty affable gentleman. I said, yeah, I understand. I've read some books, and they said that President Kennedy ordered the agents off the car, and he cut me off. And he said, I don't remember Kennedy ever saying anything about not having agents on the back of the car. If you look at newsreels, you'll see agents on there. And I was flabbergasted, got caught in my mouth. I couldn't believe this. My mind was spinning like this is the head of the White House detail categorically telling me President Kennedy didn't order him off the car. Yeah. After I got off the call, he said some other very interesting things too. But after I got off the call, I said to myself, you know what, Vin, I think like a defense attorney all the time. I said, you know what? People on the other side are going to say, Al was just one man, albeit the number one agent. He was very lucid. He was 76 at the time. He had all his marbles upstairs, sounded very lucid, remembered tremendous details of the FDR era on. So I started to try to corroborate or negate what he had to say. And all these agents were telling me through the years, early 90s onward, it was like they were reading cue cards, Jess. They were all telling me the same thing. Oh, President Kennedy never orders off the car. Where did you get that baloney from? He was a very nice man, never interfere with actions at all. One agent told me, presidents are thinking about world events and their speeches and whatnot. The last thing you're thinking about is if Joe Jones is back there on the back of the car. And it just hit me like lightning, like, oh, I'm really onto something. At the same time, the onus falls back in the Secret Service because during the Warren Commission, they threw the blame onto the deceased president who couldn't defend himself, and that got everybody's eye off the ball and said, well, these are the good guys. The president didn't want the security. Then I found out when I interviewed the agent who drove the FOB car in Dallas and many other trips, Sam Kinney took sole responsibility for the removal of the bubble top. He said Kennedy, Ken O'Donnell, no one else had. He was his sole responsibility. He lived with it for then 30-year regret in the early 90s. And I said to myself, wow, this is crazy. And then it got more than that. Then I found out the motorcycles. Normally, Kennedy had many motorcycles around his limousine, usually 4 to 6 on each side. Good number, sometimes even more than that. On the prior Texas stops in San Antonio, Houston, he had a whole bunch of motorcycles, like 2 lines worth of motorcycles. Well, they claimed that President Kennedy didn't like these motorcycles beside the car. He couldn't hear a conversation, which, as many films and photos from other trips show, he had no trouble at all, including, within 24 hours. Well, when Wynn Lawson, who I spoke to, and I also corresponded with him, he was the lead advance agent, Secret Service agent for the Dallas trip. When he testified under oath to the Warren Commission, Alan Dulles, of all people, asked him, was there a specific order from the president in this case? He goes, not in this instance were there orders from him. And again, I think he realized the ramifications because he immediately followed up with, well, it was my understanding he, like a lot of motorcycles beside the car, got to keep in mind in 1964, and for many years after, people were taking these federal officials at their word because films and photos weren't released for decades later to compare and contrast. The dead president, he can't, defend himself. So the lack of agents on the car, the lack of a top, the lack of the motorcycles beside the car, and other issues were deemed as, well, I guess it's just fate accompli. It was just, Kennedy's favorite poem was I Have a Rendezvous with Death. Meantime, we all have a rendezvous with death, but it was made Shakespearean because of what happened to him, the triumph of the tragedy of the Kennedys. Well, another major thing, Jess's major discovery of mine, besides, the agents not being on the car and some of these other revelations, was I found that the building rooftops were normally guarded during not only the Kennedy era, the Eisenhower, Truman, and FDR days as well. And most people, and I'm including this, thought, well, building rooftops, that happened because of the assassination. They beefed up security, so they guarded rooftops from that point on, but not during the Kennedy and earlier days. I thought it's not true. Spent a lot of money on newspapers.com and other sources, former Secret Service official books that were out of print, interviews, whatnot, and I found, my God, many foreign and domestic trips, he had building security. He had law enforcement agents or police or both guarding rooftops. And then the 2 Secret Service, official Secret Service books, written but with the help of the Deputy Chief of the Secret Service, Paul Paterni, matter-of-factly said, whenever the president was in a parade, agents or police guard building rooftops until the presidential motorcade passes. Big thing, a recent thing, 2020 during the COVID lockdown. Thank God this gentleman shared this ABC video with me because his channel went on down soon under for copyright violations. He had tons of old ABC, NBC, and CBS political footage from like the 50s, 60s, 70s onward. I think he worked for the networks, one of them, but that's another story. And he had ABC reporter Ron Gardner telling many millions of people around the world this precious video clip that I saved, and I have it on several of my videos, talking about building rooftops are normally guarded. I can't see how something like this could have happened. President Kennedy was still alive, wasn't declared dead. This is within a half hour of the assassination. He's telling the world Ron Gardner is that building rooftops are normally guarded. They've been for many years. He went on because he just couldn't comprehend how this could happen. His buildings should have been guarded. But again, like my mom and dad always tell me, then 10 people could have killed Kennedy a day. We were so in grief. All those details you're telling us decades later went in one ear and out the other. And there weren't VCRs.
Yeah.
There weren't investigative reporters.
Yes.
There wasn't the paparazzi. There wasn't the internet to compare and contrast films and photos. So in our 1963, 64 minds, if the government's telling us this is the way it happened, whether we had suspicions or not, when Ruby shot Oswald, a lot of people had suspicions. They just went about, like what Kevin Costner said in the JFK movie, let's get on with our lives, gentlemen. That's what the populace, for the most part, did, because they were handicapped. They didn't have, like I always tell people, all these agents I spoke to the vast majority of the Kennedy detail. If I would have tried to attempt to speak to them in 63, 64, they would have hung up with me, no comment, because they were still officially agents. Okay. By the time I spoke to them, they were long retired, collecting their government pensions. Everything was safe. Some young whippersnapper on the phone. It's easier to remember the truth than the lie. So even though some of them believe Oswald did it, they're telling me, well, President Kennedy never wore us off the car, never wore the bubble top off, et cetera, et cetera. So it was like, wow, so I guess that's just to sum it up. And that's what led to my first book of 7, Survivor's Guilt. In my latest book, 7th book, President Kennedy Should Have Survived Dallas. It's not just a retread of the first one. There's new things in here as well. Is the overwhelming thing, and I always say this during my lectures, is conspiracy or no conspiracy, Oswald or no Oswald. If the Secret Service would have done their normal protective functions, Kennedy would have lived. Just compare and contrast his prior stop. We talk about the Texas trip. The one before, 4 days before, was in Florida, Cape Canaveral, Miami, and Tampa. He had outstanding protection. He had agents on the back of the car. Limousine was going at a fast clip. Special Agent in Charge Boehner Boring always accompanied President Kennedy on trips. Floyd Boring was in the front seat. You had military aid in the car. You had many motorcycles flanking the car. You had building rooftops guarded. Not only is that in Secret Service documents that only came out in the late 1990s, thanks to the ARRB, but I spoke to Russell Groover, who was the lead motorcycle officer in Tampa, and he told me, matter of fact, oh yeah, Vince, during that entire 28-mile motorcade, almost 3 times as long as Dallas, by the way, all multi-story building rooftops were heavily guarded. If anybody even would have raised a window or come to a window untoward, and the person wouldn't have enjoyed the rest of the motorcade, if you catch my drift.
Yeah.
And just as a little caveat, Jess, you might say, multi-story buildings, that's awesome. But what about ranch dwellings, like 1 story? How those were guarded? Military police, and I have films and photos, military police and or regular police were lining the streets and facing the crowd. So their eye level was those 1-story ranch dwellings. Anything above, that's when the sheriff's department had heavily guarded, men on there. And when you factor in Kennedy's going at a much faster clip, he has agents at the back of the car, the military aide in the front car, who was told first time ever in Dallas not to ride there. The Secret Service told him they wanted to accentuate full exposure. And he even thought that was unusual. And another thing, too, throwing some random things out, is as some people famously know, maybe not, that when President Kennedy, when they did the advanced security for Texas, they found no threats in Dallas. No one wanted wished any ill on Kennedy. There was the John Birch Society, wanted for trees and posters, welcome Kennedy to Dallas, whatnot. And for people who believe Oswald after London was Oswald too, if you believe that stuff. But the bottom line is, I always make the analogy, it would be like if former President Obama visited Mississippi. Oh, no threats here, sir, you're good to go. Roy Kellerman, to his credit, before the Warren Commission, said it was unusual. They didn't find anything. They went through 3 different checks. This was the town that Kennedy was warned not to go. Senator William Fulbright, Pierre Salinger, Evelyn Lincoln, and others warned Kennedy about Dallas. And Kennedy, I'm quoting Kennedy, when they were landing in Love Field, he says, well, we're heading to nut country now. And he even ruminated about a possible assassination the night before. Last night would have been a hell of a night to assassinate a president, talk about Houston. And when I spoke to Marty Underwood, who was the Houston advance man for the Democratic National Committee, also was going to do Austin to Kennedy to live to see. He said that he went up to Kennedy and said, sir, we're getting all these rumors. There's no ifs, ands, or buts that something's going to happen. You're going to be assassinated. And JFK said, no, Marty, you worry about me too much. To San Antonio Congressman Henry Gonzalez, he said, Henry, the Secret Service took care of everything. There's nothing to worry about. Jim Lehrer, famous newspaper article came out, and I think the Herald Tribune that morning of the assassination. Secret Service is Secret Service is sure, all is secure. Secret Service is sure, all is secure. Ironically, within that morning, early afternoon, whatnot, depending on time zone, he's killed.
The
But anyway,
morning of the 22nd.
right. The bottom
Okay.
line is, he was warned about this city, and this is even a city that JFK himself said we're heading to that country.
Mm-hmm.
Roy Kellerman testified to the Warren Commission. It was unusual, no threats were found. And this is a kind of, some people even speculated, and it's good speculation, maybe they didn't find anything because threats were hidden. So it looked like, no worries, President. We can just
Sure.
your security. And Kennedy's facing forward. He's there with Jackie and the Connollys. He's waving to the crowd. He's trying to memorize his speech. He's thinking about world affairs. Again, he's not thinking, I wonder if that building rooftop's guarded. I wonder if, Clint Hill and Jack Reddy are behind me on the back car. Dude, presidents don't think of those things. But what happens is people just get they love the triumph and tragedy of the Kennedys. So they love, it's almost like a Shakespearean thing. Hey, Kennedy didn't want agents on the back of the car. He wanted the motorcycle. He didn't want the top. He had a rendezvous with death. As much as you won't believe Oswald had alone. Oswald did it. Kennedy kind of had it coming. That's in the thing that's really disgusting to me is Gerald Blaine and Clint Hill. And this isn't delusions of grandeur. If you read my books, you'll see they literally came out with their books because of me. They were fly fishing in Colorado, friends for 50 years, and they saw this is before my first book came out officially. They saw all my work on the internet, and one thing led to another, and they came out with the Kennedy detail. Clint Hill was very much involved with that book as well. Gerald Blaine, Blaine, not Gerald Bain.
Not Bain. I listened. So you have a video on your channel, and I listened to it actually on my walk this morning, where you were talking about the letter you sent, and then the way that Clint Hill talked about that letter, but then also the way that Gerald referred to part of your letter, which lets you know, they've talked about this.
Oh, yeah.
But then they denied it.
They denied it. And then Lisa McCubbin, his co-author, then later his wife, co-author all his books, said that Clinton didn't read that. He threw it straight to the garbage. And it's like, wait a minute, Gerald Blaine quoted from my private letter to Clint Hill when I spoke to Gerald Blaine a couple days later. What happened was I sent it registered, receipt requested. I got Clint Hill's autograph, and he actually when I called him, he was like, about what? About my letter? I have no interest in talking to you. So I called Gerald Blaine the next day, didn't mention my letter. And I didn't know where he was like, don't be so hard on Emory Roberts. I'm like, what? And he started to quote verbatim from part of my letter. I'm like, oh my God, they shared my letter. And then a couple months later, the trade papers talked about Gerald Blaine, former aide for Kennedy, coming out with a Kennedy detail. Then I get a letter warning me from his attorney to take out any mention of Gerald Blaine on my blogs, or there will be penalties and whatnot. I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? This is free speech. So I called their bluff and didn't do anything. And then that's when the war began. 2010. Again, my first book hasn't even come out. It was a self-published. Both Gerald Blaine and Clint Hill were talking about me on C-SPAN. They show a video of me talking about their book, Kennedy detail.
Yeah.
Clint Hill comes on again with Brian Lamb a year later, a little over a year later, and he's talking about me again out of nowhere. He goes, that fellow we talked about the last time, Vince Palamara. The rest of his talk is all about Jackie Kennedy and visiting Greece and everything else. I don't know, Vince Palamara, little amateur me. What it is, I struck a nerve because they knew that I spoke to their colleagues, and they're full of it. In fact, Gerald Blaine in 2004, 6 years before his book came out, Jess, he joined the course. He also said President Kennedy never interfered actions, never ordered him off the car. And when I said, there's a famous bit in Death of President William Manchester where it says that President Kennedy allegedly said, get these Ivy League charlatans off the back of the car, which doesn't even make any sense. Ivy League charlatans. Kennedy was Ivy League too, but
he was.
And he's attributing it to Floyd Boring. You look at the book's notes, and Manchester talks about all the people he interviewed. Floyd Boring's not interviewed for the book. I ran it by Floyd Boring. He goes, that's not true. I never told him that. That's not true at all. President Kennedy was a very nice man. He never wore us at the back of the car in Tampa or anywhere else. I'm like, oh my God. So I look, there's an interview with Gerald Blaine, though. Gerald Blaine then goes around, he's on video denying he ever spoke to Manchester. I contact Wesleyan University. Gerald Blaine's interview is missing from their files. All the other ones are either under seal to the year 2060 or released on the ARRB. His is missing. Just a coincidence, huh? How convenient, because I think that would be the smoking gun that would show, in my opinion, it's already been proven. He's interviewed, it's in her A to Z, Gerald Blaine interview from 1965. In fact, when I spoke to Gerald Blaine in 2004, he matter of factly said, well, yeah, Jacqueline Kennedy said it was okay to speak to him. And I know Clint Hill, and he mentioned other people. Then all of a sudden, from that point on, he started to say, oh, I never spoke to an author book. I never spoke to William Manchester, because he realized the ramifications. If Floyd Boring, who's denying that's even true, never spoke to William Manchester, who made up the myth of get the Ivy League charlatans off the back of the car? Gerald Blaine. And that's the reason why Gerald Blaine came out with his book and was so nasty towards me. And if you read his book is disgusting. It's nothing but a blame the victim thing. In fact, he invents a November 25th morning at JFK's funeral meeting with the Secret Service that didn't happen. Yeah, I'm sure the Secret Service got together because the walk to St. Matthew's Cathedral, de Gaulle and Haile Selassie, they had to make sure they had good security for that. He's claiming just in his book, he invents this whole meaning of everyone's conveniently dead but Gerald Blaine. He's quoting from dead agents saying that, we can't let the world know that President Kennedy or us at the back of the car. We can't think we're trying to blame him. But by writing this in the book, that's exactly what's conveyed. It's conveyed that he ordered him off the car. And more, there's in the interest of time, I can just go on. There's these reports they submitted 6 months into the assassination, trying to lay claim that, Kennedy on a couple of occasions did order off the back car. Gerald Bain denounced his own report by saying Kennedy never wore off the car. The other major source, Floyd Boring, told me on actually 3 occasions, if you include a letter, says Kennedy was very cooperative, said that President Kennedy never wore off the car, never interfered with actions at all. Emory Roberts was merely just conveying the wishes of Floyd Boring, says nothing about Kennedy. Jack Reddy, when I tried to speak to him about it, he said, I have no comment. I don't know you from Adam. He didn't corroborate it or say, true or false. He wouldn't talk to me about it. And then famously, Clint Hill, he's the 5th guy from the reports. He said that I never heard President Kennedy says, never heard it, but I heard from the administrative offices of the White House detail between November 19th and November 21st that President Kennedy had made such suggestions. He says it twice and he goes, I don't remember who told me, but then when he testifies to the Warren Commission, our inspector, he reveals the source as being Floyd Boring. But then we have Floyd Boring denying it ever was true. So it's either it's totally fiction or Floyd Boring took it upon himself. And yes, he's one of my 3 suspects. We'll get to that in a moment. Conveyed the wishes of the president, in quotes, that we don't have to ride in the back of the car. And it was devastating. Now, the thing is, another thing that proves this is a lie, Jess, that Kennedy never rode with the car. Clint Hill rode in the back of the car 4 times on Main Street in Dallas. Oh, I thought Kennedy didn't want you there. He rode there 4 times. I thought there was a presidential order. So he realized through my writings, and then he started to make up, I think it's his book, 5 Presidents. He said that President Kennedy turned around, didn't say anything, but looked at me. There's no films and photos showing President Kennedy looking back, and President Kennedy with his awful back could not even, I don't even think I could turn back in that kind of seat and look back there and see. He didn't. It was all to allay the fears and concerns of the public that they didn't do their job. Now, you could view it as sinister, you could view it as gross negligence. I happen to view it as gross negligence. I do think there was an element of the Secret Service, I hate to say this, few bad apples, and everybody else is just following orders. They wish Kennedy dead because the security was stripped. I mean, one of my sons, talk about Floyd Boring, he was the planner of the Texas trip from the Secret Service's point of view. He gave out assignments, worked hand in glove with Winston Lawson and David Grant. Again, he conveyed this notion of President Kennedy didn't want you on the back of the car between November 19th and November 21st. Clint Hill said that in his reports, his testimony, and Frank Yeager, who was the advance agent for the San Antonio trip, I believe, in part of Tampa. He also told me in a letter, it was between November 19th and November 21st, that this wish was made not to ride in the back of the car. Yet on Tampa, they were riding there, and many other trips they were riding there. Oh, it's just coincidence. Kennedy's going to be assassinated. Oh, he didn't want these men on the back of the car. You see what I mean? This is really tough because it's not even a mixed bag, too. It's not even like, well, somebody just did tell me he ordered them. They were all telling me the same thing. And a lot of them were in the midst of telling me, oh, son, it was Oswald acting alone, blah, blah, blah. But then they would throw out, Kennedy never wore something back car. He never wore the top off. Where are you getting this at? He never wore the motorcycles. And again, the one agent famously told me, presidents don't have time to think of trivial things like their own protection. They trust us, sometimes to their detriment. But that's the big thing. And the other suspects, it's Floyd Bourne. The other one is Emory Roberts. Emory Roberts was the shift leader was in charge of the other agents, the follow-up car that ran 5 feet behind. In fact, Sam Kinney told me when he was driving, you can see in the film, the photos, he tried to maintain a 5-foot distance between his car and the presidential limousine. He tellingly was always looking at the back of Kennedy's head. That's how he knew how close he was, ironically, the back of the head during the assassination. Well, what happened was, back up a tiny bit, in Grodin and Livingstone's book, High Treason, there's a little segment, I think it's a footnote, it says that Emory Roberts is the one who gave the order not to move. And I was like, boy, that's fascinating, but there's no source of an interview of Emory Roberts. Where did he get this at? So I ran this by Sam Kinney, fully expecting him to denounce it. This is the early 90s, so I had no access to grind. Whatever these guys told me, there was either going to be no book or no nothing. I wasn't like on a quest to write a book. I was actually in a quest to write a free article. There's going to be an article in the third decade and probably go on my life, do other things, whatnot. I wrote a book because of all the things that transpired during and after the interviews.
Yeah.
Well, Sam Kinney tells me exactly right. Exactly right. He ordered the agents not to move. Is exactly right. And I was sitting there right next to him. And then Ken, I think the wheels were spinning. He realized the ramifications. Because, well, he probably thought that he would run over Jack Reddy, who started to run after the car, and he didn't want them to be run over. Spoke to an agent, Dan Emmett, and he told me that is so lame. He says, we're there to cover and evacuate. Our lives, our self-interest has nothing to do with anything. We're there to cover and protect, whether we get killed, run over, shot. So that answer, even if it was true, is lame. But the fact that fellow agents denouncing the merits of that argument is sinister. The shooting begins. He orders the agents not to move. Okay, I think that's why Clint Hill got there late. He was also one of the 9 agents that drank the night before. Grounds for removal of the agents. Yeah, 4 agents on the follow-up car. Clint Hill, Jack Reddy, Landis, and Glenn Bennett. Those are the 4 agents on the follow-up car drank the night before. Grounds for removal of the Secret Service. I think it's another reason why he was late getting there. Well, back up to Love Field, roughly 45 minutes before the assassination. The beginning of the motorcade. Yeah, Jess, I'm the one who actually discovered this video, popularized it. 1991, I got a whole bunch of WFAA VHS tapes of their footage. They rebroadcast the whole thing in the middle of the night in 1983, and it made its way to Canada, and I spent like $100 to get all these tapes. Now they're common, partly because of me, all over YouTube. But back then, 1991, before the internet, I'm viewing this footage. I'm like, what is going on in Love Field? There's an agent jogging limousine. All of a sudden he stops. Not once, twice, but 3 times. Does this, the universal sign of what gives. And Emory Roberts stands up and goes like this. Well, I spoke to Don Lawton, who was that agent. I'll clarify something for the viewers. And Don Lawton told me in 1995, I should have been there. I should have been there in the back of the car. Oh, you always have regrets, remorse. If only they had left guys in the back of the car. He didn't say anything about Kennedy ordered us away and whatnot. None of that stuff. Well, the tragedy is, back in 1995, I did not know he was the agent. In fact, I confused the issue. For years, I thought it was Henry Ribga, another agent. And then, not to confuse your viewers, they can read my books and they'll see the clarification. It actually turns out I wasn't wrong after all. Henry Ribga and Don Lawton both jogged with a limousine. But what happened was Henry Ribga disappears. He's only available in the newsreels. But when the black and white video begins, the famous video that most people know of the start and when he does like this, then you only see Don Lawton from that point. So actually both agents did walk or jog with the car. It was Emory Roberts who pulled them away. So you have that. You have Emory Roberts pulling them away. Don Lawton saying, I should have been there in the back of the car. Some people might throw out, hey, Vince, there's a Secret Service report that says that Lawton's duties were to be at Love Field. Paul Landis, in his latest book, came out a couple years ago, is very skeptical about that we had plenty of coverage. We needed everybody we could get in the motorcade. Why would he be left behind at Love Field? And there's many times that these official duties are subverted. So you can't get too caught up in that. And when Don Lawton passed away, I think in 2012, I do believe, well, his one friend came out in the 50th anniversary. I think it's an Iowa newspaper. It's a female. She was a former military intelligence officer, and she speaks lovingly about her friend Don Lawton. She says that Don said several times, I should have been there. I should have been there in the back of the car. Nothing about blaming Kennedy. And he was worried because the Warren Commission was originally going to have him testify, and several of the other agents were going to testify. And I think what happened was the Secret Service.
And they didn't.
No, they submitted these 5 reports in their place saying that in Tampa, 4 days before Kennedy orders off the car, if you actually source out what they say, as I do in my first book, I go into great detail about those 5 reports. So no doubt about it. That you see, it all originates from Floyd Boring. Floyd Boring's denying it ever happened. And then you also have Gerald Bain, the #1 agent, who he's the immediate assistant to, saying it's not true. And then you look at the films and photos that only came out in the last 5 to 15 years. I may reiterate earlier about films and photos coming out. And you'll see, my God, this motorcade, which happens to be 28 miles long, like Dallas was only 10, 11 miles long. So it's almost 3 times as long. There's agents on the back of the car. And again, you'll see the motorcycles. You'll see, it turns out the building rooftops are guarded. But the bottom line is, wait a minute, they could afford to have agents in the back of the car, one of them being Don Lawton, who also rode in the back of the car on the Chicago trip earlier in that year, March of '63. Yet he gets to Love Field and he's waved away and he goes, I guess, 3 times. If his duties were to remain Love Field, why is he putting up a protest? Why is he even attempting to stay with the car, get on the back of the car? Why is he telling me and his friend, I should have been in the back of the car? His #1 regret was we didn't have agents in the back of the car. He never was, well, Kennedy didn't want us in the back of the car. See, what that was, that laid the foundation for taking everybody's eye off the ball of the Secret Service.
Yes.
Yeah, everybody looks at J. Edgar Hoover, the CIA, the mafia, and rightly so. There's a lot of good reasons to suspect them for the assassination. I think most people, they look, the good guys. Clint Hill, he got an award. Meantime, he's one of the agents that drank the night before, should have been removed, and yet he became the special agent in charge of the White House detail and assistant director. He retired 50 years ago until his passing in February this year.
Yeah.
He lived the good life, and he literally made millions off his books. His books all came out of the #1 book company in the world, Simon Schuster. He had an advanced movie deal that may still be going forward. Yes, there's going to be a movie about his life.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Do tremendous damage. I nipped in the bud. There was going to be a Kennedy detail movie for the 50th anniversary. I scuttled that. Jake Gyllenhaal's dad, Steven, was going to be the director of the movie. I contacted him directly with all my evidence, all my interviews. Within 5 days, it was gone from the trade papers. Their website came down. That's when the threats to me really amped up. At my former place of employment, Gerald Blaine's one friend, I'm not going to name him for legal reasons, but he contacted the HR department and the CEO of my company trying to get me fired for unpatriotic writings. Hey, there's nothing to this. Odds what I have to loan people. Yet they're threatening me over something I wrote. Now, albeit it's killed the movie, so they're a little bitter, but he was trying to get me fired. Make a long story short, nothing happened. The HR department called me in my old job, and they laughed. It's free speech, free First Amendment. You're fine. Like, if anything, if this gentleman writes again, we'll tell him we're going to press charges against him for harassment. So you're good. But the bottom line is, I'm telling my parents, everybody, can you believe this 50 years later? And I'm getting harassed by it turned out he's a former military intelligence friend of Gerald Blaine. And I'm getting harassed online. I'm having blogs taken down. One time, all my books were removed from Amazon. They were all unavailable. The timing of it was Carol Leonig's #1 best-selling book, Zero Fail in the Secret Service. I think someone said, Vince might get collateral sales. Oh, we got to get rid of them. And they were all gone. I contacted Amazon. Said, my books are gone. And he said, sir, we have no idea why. We're trying to work on this. And it took 24 to 48 hours. They all slowly came back. But
what year was that?
That was 2021.
You can always tell when you're getting over the target when the attacks start, because you could be talking about all kinds of stuff that nobody cares about, but then the minute you start getting the attacks, you're like, oh, it's the hit dog that howls, right?
Jess, so true. You think I got twice on C-SPAN, a little old amateur me before my first book even came out. It was a self-published affair. They came out of me in earnest on C-SPAN, not once but twice. They were 2 for 2, actually. Then you had Blaine's lawyer send me a self-addressed one that was registered. I had to sign for it at the post office. What do you call it when you have to sign for it? Scary language saying, if they see any harm to the sales of their book, The Kennedy Detail, we'll be seeking punitive damage against you. Remove his name from your blog at once. So the heck is this about? And then you have the harassment at work. Actually, in the interest of time, it's actually happened twice at work. It was the same gentleman. And when I said today we're going to press charges, I never heard from them. They said they were going to press charges the second time. I never heard if they did. But I can tell you what, the harassment stopped until 2021, right on the eve of Carol Leonig's #1 massive. She wrote a book on Trump, and it was a massive bestseller. Zero Fail was a massive bestseller. Right in the eve of her book coming out. So looking forward to it. Where's my book? I check every day. In case people wonder, I literally check every day on Amazon, make sure my books are there ever since 2013 on, make sure there's no shenanigans. And they were all gone. And again, Amazon didn't say, oh, sir, there's nothing to us. They were flabbergasted. Vince, we do not know, sir. We're actively trying to get them back. They were completely gone from searches. And also, in the interest of fair play, some other pro-conspiracy books were also gone at that time. I let Tink Thompson know The Last Second in Dallas, his then new book, was gone. Larry Hancock had a new book at the time. It was gone, but no pro-Oswald books were harmed in the making of this hack. All those books were up there, but any of the new books on conspiracy, including all of mine, were gone. And they all came back within 24, 48 hours of her book. Because again, I think they thought it was going to be collateral sales. Like, hey, people doing search engine checks, Secret Service, they'd come up with my Survivors Guild always used to come up number one, and they'd see, or number two with Kennedy detail. And so they'd see, and I'm going to buy this gentleman's book, because physical bookstores are like a thing of past now for most people. Go online, so they don't care if this comes out by the Acme Publishing Company or Simon Schuster. They're doing their searches. They've done very well. I work for a living. I'm not in this for the money. I broke even, but I mean, they do very well as far as none of my books have stiffed. They've done very well. The point being is, it's also a threat to people like Gerald Blaine in Colorado, fly fishing and whatnot, who was retired, had no interest in writing a book. Clint Hill, for years, Jess, used to say, and Sam Kinney told me, I said, oh, we are like a badge of honor. We would never kiss and tell all. We'd never write books. Clint Hill wrote, 4 books?
Yeah,
They're making money because all their books sold hundreds of thousands of copies. They made millions from the books, and he made millions from a movie that may or may not still come out. Josh Hartnett, the one actor I think supposedly involved in that, there's going to be somebody playing Clint Hill, and I know what's going to happen. This movie comes out, and you're going to see, get those Ivory Shardsons on the back of the car. You're going to have thousands of people believe and say, hey, Vince, I saw this movie and said to Kennedy and want them on the back of the car. I deal with 2 things all the time in my emails, Jess. Greer shooting the president, which didn't happen. The other thing is, Vince, is it true that Kennedy didn't want them on the back of the car? So I have to deal with these 2 things all the time. It's because it's such pervasive myths. And again, if you take away the myth of Kennedy didn't want them there, it's not true. And then you find out all these films and photos that are there. Then you see all the motorcycles beside the car. You see the bubble top used in between the third and a half of all his motorcades. You see a building rooftops are guarded. Normally a military aide rode in the front seat. Normally he had good protective intelligence. On prior trips, they had threats. They found threats. They neutralized them. They put them under custody. In fact, Jess, when President Kennedy visited Pittsburgh in October of 62, my own hometown, the police chief came out the day of the assassination. It's a newspaper article we printed in my book saying that Kennedy would have lived if he came to our time, because we guarded every building rooftop. We had sharpshooters. And if anything untoward would have happened, opening a window and somebody would have came to the window unexpectedly, that would have been the end of them. And sure enough, it took years. Getty Images, I have it also in my my 6th book, The Plot to Kill President Kennedy in Chicago. I talk about prior trips and threats and whatnot. There's a Getty image from October 62. There's police on the rooftop. A lot of times they're not captured because the focus is on Kennedy and whatnot.
Sure.
This one captures above, and they're standing on rooftops, October 62. There's more evidence. My books, the last couple, especially talk about the, again, building rooftops being guarded. I tell you what, going down this journey is crazy, just because, again, if people say, what was your thrust, Vince? What were you all in this for? Well, basically, it was going to be a 3rd decade free, no, remuneration, no nothing. It's going to be a free article in the journal, and that was going to be the end of it. Oh, I spoke to these former agents. Look what they told me, blah, blah, blah. Not thinking they were going to tell me anything crazy, because I'll be honest with you, at the time I thought, they're not going to tell me anything. I was skeptical too. I was like, what are they going to tell me? But I guess because it was like a grandfather thing, I was 26. A lot of these gentlemen were like, their 70s and on. Felt comfortable. I didn't have an axe to grind, because at that time I didn't know I was going to be writing a book. Is because what these gentlemen told me, that there became a book. When Gerald Bain told me, I don't remember Kennedy ever saying anything about not having angels on the back of the car. And also, Jesse also threw out something amazing, which pertains to Dallas. I ran the motorcade ride by him about, Maine to Houston, to Elm. And he said the motorcade route was changed for Dallas. I'm like, what? What happened was the Haas Select Committee, interestingly enough, they spoke to him twice. There was a staff interview. Those came out in the late 90s. They also interviewed him in executive session. Partner, the head
this
of
is Bain?
Yeah, this is Bain, B-E-H-N, head of Wise Detail. He was interviewed. executive session at that time, and still to this day is not. Yes, the ARB never released it, and I told Jefferson Morley and other people, see if you could try to release these. They've still never been released, the executive sessions. I asked them, well, what did the HSCA what they want to know? Is they want to know about his trip to Florida. They also want to know why the motorcade route was changed in Dallas. And I was like, sir, was it changed? He goes, well, I know it was changed in Dallas, but the reasons why I've forgotten completely. I don't know. No, forget the skepticism about he didn't remember. He's corroborating that the motorcade route was changed. In those staff interviews that were released, it turns out Gerald Bain was involved in the early planning of the Texas trip. Even though Floyd Boring, his number one assistant, the number two agent of the White House detail, was working hand in glove with advance agents Winston Lawson and David Grant. In the early stages, when they were still thinking about going to the women's building as opposed to the Trade Mart,
Right.
when he called, in fact, Gerald Bain even famously told Kenny O'Donnell, we're never going there, meaning the Trade Mart. The Trade Mart was much worse security-wise than the women's building. And they were worried about the catwalks and whatnot. And that was the big thing. But Gerald Bain is saying the hospital committee asked him, and he corroborated it. He didn't say, he goes, again, this isn't a conspiracy theorist. This is a guy who believed Oswald acted alone. It was also the number one agent of Kennedy's detail. It's not somebody who's writing a book. He never wrote a book. He never made one dime off Kennedy. He died 6 months later. He died in like April of 1993. Thank God. Thank God I got these guys. Most of them I got on audio tape or in writing. Thank God I contacted with so many through attrition, just getting older. They've passed away. In fact, the vast majority of these men have passed away. The few that are still around, I'm persona non grata now, because now the jig's up. They know. Books like Gerald Blaine. They know, like, for example, I'll give you one example. I'll keep it clean for your listeners and whatnot. Larry Newman was one of the many Kennedy agents I spoke to. Very good source. He was one of the many who told me Kennedy never worried about the car. Really good guy, really good source. Well, after the Gerald Blaine book came out and I became more well known, I contacted him again. He 180-degree turn. He goes, I know who you are. I think you're crazier than house rats. I'll keep out the expletive. And he basically hung up with me in like 30 seconds to give me the time of day. But if you go back to 2004, he was sweet as pie. In fact, we actually spoke twice because he called me back on his own dime. And, I think we had a little more to talk about. I'm sorry. I hope I didn't cut you short. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. We ended up talking about other things. And I got a short letter from him too. But the bottom line is, so the few that are around now, they're very advanced now. They're late 80s, 90s. So the window closed. I always think that scene in Titanic where they're running under the airtight doors, and that's it. Thank God I got in there when I did in the early 90s on, because now they're dead. And like even Paul Landis, who came out with his major best-selling book, The Final Witness. He wasn't the final witness. I do have detailed review of his book in my 7th book, my latest one. Well, he's 88, going on 68. The guy looks incredible for his age, and he wants nothing to do with me. I contacted him many times for an interview. One time he even agreed to an intermediary, and he cut it short probably because he realizes who I am, what my thrust is now. But see, that was the beautiful time, was that time from 1992 to like 1998 when they didn't compare and contrast. The internet was either not around or in its infancy. I was unknown. I wasn't in, didn't have a book. So consequently, but just the bottom line in all this is that I always tell people there'd be no book. If these guys would have towed the official lines of President Kennedy, yes, he didn't want us on the back of the car. He didn't want that top on. He didn't want those motorcycles by his car. He did have a rendezvous with death. He was lax in his security, and that there wouldn't be a book. I would just probably wrote that little article in 1991, 92 saying it was really interesting, fascinating talking to these men who guarded presidents. And there's no book there. The book became Jesus, what they're all telling me.
Contrast.
And not only the harassment I received in the last, X amount of years, you realize this is still a hot potato politically and whatnot, is the fact that I can't stress this enough. In the last 5 to 15 years, so many films and photos, especially motorcade films and photos, have become public domain. Photographers have passed away. Copyright laws have become very loose, like Pinterest. Everybody shares copyrighted images galore on Facebook, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so a lot of stuff has come available. So now you can see, and I have a 2.5-hour video. I pulled it up on my YouTube channel for people to see. If you go to the post section of my YouTube channel, and it's all these marvelous films and photos and newspaper articles were germane. I put them in there. It's all motorcades of President Kennedy, but you can see in the my post. If you go to my YouTube channel, Vince Palamara, it's easy to find. And you go
Okay.
to the post section, it's the latest post. Or if you go to the first page of the videos, you scroll down like a couple dozen, it's there. It's
Okay.
2.5
I'll
miles.
put a link in the show notes for my viewers to be able to find that. That's
Great.
awesome.
And yeah, you'll
So
see. Now, yeah, good. That's it.
it's okay.
Yeah,
I just, so we've talked about the regulations that were violated. We've talked about the last minute changes. But what I would love to hear from you, I've heard two of the names. I
sure.
think is it true that you've narrowed it down to basically 3 agents that you feel we should look at? How much responsibility would you give? And how do you describe that? Like, not necessarily that all 3 are responsible, but that they're suspicious. How do you talk about it?
What I do, and I hedge, I go back and forth. I have a very open mind to the point where some people still hold it against me, a few people. Back in 2007, for 6 months, only 6 months in 2007, I was persuaded by, I know, Vince Bugliosi. I started to believe that there were definitely conspiracies to kill Kennedy. Conspiracies existed to kill Kennedy, but Oswald beat them to the punch. I have such an open mind. I'm not wedded to theories, but then I was slapped in the face, figuratively speaking, by Doug Horn and James Douglas and put me back on the pro-conspiracy track. I've been there ever since mid-2007. So there's that. But I have a very open mind. So I say to myself, Jess, well, all these agents weren't seriously involved in a plot to kill Kennedy. That's nuts. The Secret Service wasn't involved. That's nuts as far as an organization. But what is not nuts is a couple bad apples. And I narrowed down to 3: Floyd Boring, Emory Roberts, and Bill Greer. Now, again, Floyd Boring, he was the number 2 agent of Kennedy's detail, and he was the planner of the Texas trip. Actually, he was on all the advance work of Kennedy's trips. Even if he wasn't physically there, oftentimes he was. He even admitted to the Truman Library and the JFK Library in oral histories that he was on all the advance work. He did all the advance work during the Kennedy days. So even if
For
he wasn't
all the
physically
cities, not even
all
just Dallas. Okay.
Yes, foreign and domestic, everything from 61 to 60. I guess he goes back to when he was president-elect. So even before he was officially president, he was there, when Kennedy was going to visit Boston. He made sure he had all the advance people there and working with the police, federal, and state, and local people. He did all that if he wasn't physically there. Well, no, you might say, well, Vince, that's good, but why does that make him a suspect? It makes him a suspect because, as I said before, he is the one who is basically blamed for going around and telling the White House detail between November 19th and November 21st. Dallas, that Kennedy didn't want you guys in the back of the car unless it's absolutely necessary. Don't ride in the back of the car. Well, then we find out Floyd Boring, thank God I actually spoke to the gentleman more than once, 2 times I got a letter from him. He's telling me there's no truth to that at all. Kennedy never interfered with actions at all, never was of the back car. He denounced the whole Tampa trip that's been blamed him because of the William Manchester's book and whatnot. So the onus falls back on him. You got that. He's also involved in the limousine inspection, the crucial limousine inspection, the chain of command of the bullet fragments and the skull particles. And it turns out Deputy Chief Paul Paterni, James Riley's direct assistant, was there at the limousine inspection. Paul Paterni just happened to be a former member of the OSS, which was the forerunner of the CIA. In fact, when Paul Paterni died in 1984, his CIA made a big deal about it. If you go to the CIA's official website and punch in Paul Paterni, they have his obituary there on the CIA website. So he was a forerunner, and he worked hand in glove with James Jesus Angleton and Ray Roca, who was the liaison to the Warren Commission. So Paul Paterni had these kind of OSS CIA background, working with Raymond Roca and James Jesus Angleton decades before the assassination. And he's there, the bloody limousine, just him and Floyd Boring, no one else. This is before the FBI got to it. No one else got to it. It was there all alone in the White House garage. They beat the FBI to the punch by hours. So if there's any chicanery of bullet fragments and skull particles, any switching, any alterations, whatnot, those guys with dirty hands, Floyd Boring, and just think of a former CIA guy, OSS, but come on, was there of his hands on the limousine in the inspection of it in the chain of evidence. That's pretty crazy.
Okay. So this is a place where I'd like to pause because this is something I need to. I have not researched it. I don't know the chain of command. So let's walk through. The limo pulls up to Parkland.
Yeah.
They rush Connolly inside. Reportedly, Jackie is sitting there covering the president's head. Clint Hill comes up, convinces her. They take him away. Now what? Walk us through.
Okay. And now what happens is it's fuzzy. You got some sources saying the limousine cleaned out. You got other sources saying they attempted to, but they didn't really clean it out. I think the story is in the middle. Sam Kinney, the driver of the fob car, went up to you can see in films and photos galore. Sam Kinney's there by the limousine when they're working on Kennedy and Connolly. They start to put the fabric top of the bubble top on, ironically, when it's all over. The plexiglass and the fabric top they're putting on. You see George Hickey as well. They're there with a bucket right by the limousine and motorcycle officers. Now, some people would say, Vince, that's the clear-cut evidence there, clean out the limousine. But when you get to the White House garage, the FBI photos show the limousine still bloody back there. So I think what happened was it's either, might be surprising some of these listeners of yours, viewers, Jess, but I think that could have been the lubricant and screws to put the bubble top on, because you could see Sam Kinney and some putting the bubble top on, and that's the lubricant. Or there was an attempt to partially clean it out. There's some stories exaggerated. They completely scrubbed out the back of the car. I don't think that happened.
That's what I've heard. That's what I've thought happened. So I'm glad for you to clarify.
It was an attempt, or those were lubricant screws, and they were putting on the bubble top, and it didn't have anything to do with the cleaning. But one of the two. But now what happens is Hickey and Kinney drive the cars back to Love Field. They get in the C-130 transport plane. Just a little aside. I'll stay on message here, but Vincent Gullo, Gullo. I contacted the members of the C-130 crew in the late 90s. Never been contacted before. Sam Kinney gave me the manifest of the C-130 crew. They were out of North Carolina. These gentlemen never spoke to anybody officially. Well, Vincent Gullo admitted to me he only spoke to federal officials on this. I'm like, federal officials? The Warren Commission never interviewed. Who the hell are the federal officials interview him? He corroborated what Sam Kinney had to say, but wouldn't go any detail. He said it's too dangerous even now. This was 1998. He's telling me this in a letter, and he wouldn't respond to the fob car. What did he corroborate? He corroborated Sam Kinney saying that they found the back of Kennedy's head in the limousine. Sam Kinney was always adamant, even though he believed Oswald was the shooter. He said the back of Kennedy's head was gone. He found that piece on the back of the limousine, the C-130 transport plane. Vincent Gullo is the pilot. I contacted all his colleagues. None of them gave me the time of day, but Vincent Gullo did. So they're flying back, okay? And when they get there, get to Washington, D.C., they get I think it's still Hickey and Kinney and Richard Kaiser end up being the special agent in charge during the Nixon, Ford, and Carter years. Was part of the chain of command of these limousines going back to the White House garage. Okay, they're not at Bethesda, no, they're at the White House garage. Ours, for the FBI takes an examination of the limousine. It's just little old Paul Paterny and Floyd Boring. It's funny enough, in Manchester's book, he talks about how Kellerman and Raleigh thought it would be a good idea to check out the limousine, but Boring beat them to the punch. He beat them by hours because they were still at Love Field, and they hightailed into the White House garage with the limousines. They're getting there, they're checking it out. And that's, again, you got a guy who worked hand in glove with Ray Roca and James Jesus Angleton. He was in the forerunner of the CIA. Has his hands all over the limousine, bullet fragments, skull particles, limousine damage. There's been allegations the limousine windshield was switched out that showed a hole in it. There's several good witnesses that there was a hole. Now all of a sudden, it's Rory Kelman says it feels rather smooth today when he was feeling it during his Warren Commission testimony with our inspector. And our inspector actually says, I mean, it feels differently today? He goes, yes, it does. So there you go. So if there's any chicanery, there you go. And talk about everyone talks about the single bullet theory, the chain of command or lack thereof. Well, you got some pretty dirty hands there. But yeah, that's what happened. And then they ended up refurbishing the limousine for LBJ months later. It was called the Quick Fix. Rather than getting a new limousine, like our government then and now couldn't afford a brand new limousine. It'd be like President Lincoln's chair in Ford's Theater. Hey, just a little blood, sir. You can use that chair again. Let's use it for several more presidents. Hey, there's a little blood, but you can sit there. It's comfy. It doesn't make any freaking sense. Yet they did that with the limousine. LBJ, Nixon, Ford, and Mondale. I don't know if Carter actually, I think Mondale did. It was up to 1977 or 78. They still had it in use. And it's another myth too, just not on another side, but it's very quick. That was the last time a president ever rode in an open car. Wrong answer. During the 1964 campaign, there's many photos of LBJ in an open car. They used the Queen Mary fob car as his limousine. Now there's agents standing around him, but from building, he could have been shot in the head.
Sure.
But this stuff about, he never used, the presidents never used there's so much myth out there. They never used an open limousine again. And actually, from LBJ through and including George W. Bush, or I'm sorry, George H.W. Bush. George Senior. He had a sunroof that he could lift out. So you could see Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan and George H.W. Bush with a sunroof, so they were vulnerable too. So you had all that. So, but anyway, the bottom line, they were involved in the chain of command.
Real quick, to wrap that up, it went
Sure.
to be refurbished, you said, several months after?
Well, no, immediately after. And then it was, I want to say.
Did it go to the
June of
Lincoln?
64. Yeah. Lincoln Motor. And what they did is they worked on, they put the, obviously, new limousine. They made the bubble top permanent. They gave it bulletproof windows and whatnot, and more bulletproof armoring. They increased the horsepower of the engine. And yeah,
Right.
that roof could never be removed then. In fact, I don't even think it had a sunroof. It was just permanent, and that was it. So for that limousine. So that's what they did there. And then,
so back to Emory Roberts, though.
Yeah, Emory Roberts, my second of three suspects, to Floyd Bourne, first one. Emory Roberts was the shift leader, one of three shift leaders of the White House detail. The other was being Stu Stout, the other one being Art Godfrey. Emory Roberts, who would end up being appointment secretary to Lyndon Johnson, the only then current agent who worked for an administration. I spoke to other agents. This is unheard of. They'd never heard of this before. You're supposed to be apolitical, not Democrat or Republican. When LBJ in 64, 65, he's working as appointment secretary. In fact, there's articles I have reprinted in my books where the press was wondering, what's this agent reading the prime minister of Japan for? And Emory Roberts basically replaced Dave Powers at the desk. There's photos of him getting backslapped by LBJ and vice versa. I have a silent film, there's no sound, on my YouTube channel. You can see LBJ, big smiles on his face. He's glad hand him, slap on the back.
Wow.
Well, that's the later part. The other part is he was the commander of all the other agents in the follow-up car. Okay, he's their boss. Okay, 5 foot distance behind the limousine. Did this many times on many trips before Dallas, Texas, many other trips, including Tampa, Florida. Lord knows how many other ones. Okay, well, 45 minutes before the assassination at Love Field, when the motorcade begins, he rises in his seat. This, I discovered this back in 1991, and all the videos you've seen since literally became because of me. I popularized it, and I let everybody know, look at this. What is this? What is this? And you see Emory Roberts rise. He goes like this, and then Don Lawton, the agent next to him, raises his hand 3 times. I can discuss like what gives. Don Lawton told me that his one regret is they should have had agents on the back of the car. He told a colleague I should have been there. He was there on the back of the car during the 28-mile motorcade in Tampa. He was there in March of 63 in Chicago. Lord knows how many other trips that I'm not aware of that he was actually there. But the bottom line, he was there. Well, then when they get to the assassination, first shot rings out. Emory Roberts orders the other agents not to move. I spoke to Sam Kinney, the driver of the follow-up car, who sat a foot away. Emory Roberts, I should say, in interest of, because people might be saying, Vince, why didn't you speak to Emory Roberts? Emory Roberts died in 1973. Other than William Manchester, he never spoke to anybody but William Manchester. Never spoke to the Warren Commission, no pro or anti-conspiracy authors, Manchester was anti-conspiracy, spoke to him. And Sam Kinney confirmed that Emory Roberts ordered the other agents not to move. And before I could say to myself, why, Sam, why? He said, he's probably worried about the concern of Jack Ruby getting run over because Clint Hill already made it for the car, albeit it too late. If you look at Clint Hill, he gets the car. Kennedy's already dead. He's always flew back. Jackie gets in and out of the car of her own volition, never actually touch. So that's a big myth about Clint Hill and his heroism. They didn't give awards for almost doing your job. He didn't do it. He was a Jackie Kennedy agent who was assigned to Jacqueline Kennedy, got to the back of the car after being one of the 9 agents that drank the night before. He gets there when the shooting's all over and done with. But the bottom line, Emory Roberts, at the very least, created a tremendous delay instead of doing their job. Look, if you look at the March 30th, 1981 video of the Reagan assassination attempt, they just had 5 seconds. Agile foot, fleetness of foot. I compared this in 1996. Tink Thompson was a big fan of this part of my conference presentation in 96. I show in real time, it counts down in seconds, and you see the Zapruder film, and you see the video of Reagan getting shot. The agents were incredible, pushing him. Here's Tim McCarthy, taking the bullet. They all get in there, cover and evacuate. Jerry Parr, who I spoke to, the head of Reagan's detail, he told me cover and evacuate. As we learned, cover and evacuate. He was a young agent during the Kennedy days, by the way. He guarded Marguerite Oswald and some other stuff. But anyway, bottom line is, there's a lot of strange connections because this dude, these guys being agents for decades, whatnot. From FDR up to and including Reagan and all points in between, you'll be surprised how many Kennedy agents or future Kennedy agents there are. Guarded other presidents, had feelings for presidents more than other presidents. They were big fans of Truman. Some of them had anger and disgust at Kennedy's private life, including
Right.
Tim McIntyre, one of the agents of the fob car, famously came out in 1997 on ABC TV, said, a procurer of prostitutes, meaning JFK, you think to yourself, what do these people think of us? Meantime, Tim McIntyre is one of the agents who's 5 feet away from Kennedy. He's supposed to protect them, and he's bad-mouthing them all these years after his death. You definitely fish for the mill. Okay, so that's Emory Roberts, and he's also responsible for LBJ taking over Air Force One. Air Force Two is basically one and the same plane. Kenny O'Donnell came out and said, I had nothing to do with LBJ taking over Air Force One. Turned out it was Emory Roberts who basically hijacked Air Force One with Emory Roberts, the new Kennedy. When they got to Parkland, Kennedy's not even declared dead yet. They just arrived. He goes up to Roy Kellerman, his boss, says, you stay with Kennedy. I'm going to Johnson. So he was already usurping authority.
Emory Roberts did that?
Emory Roberts did that. Emory Roberts, Dave Powers and Kenny O'Donnell, loyal Kennedy agent, rode in the fob car. Jesse Curry, the Dallas police chief, and several other authors noted Emory Roberts' switch of allegiance. In fact, Powers and O'Donnell, what they wrote in their book, they said Roberts, who switched to Johnson as soon as Kennedy was shot. Yikes. It's like they knew where their bread was buttered. They knew who was loyal, who wasn't, and they saw what happened. Well, my other third suspect is Bill Greer. Bill Greer was the driver of the president's limousine. In fact, even people like Gerald Posner and Vince Bugliosi have said that, they believed Oswald acted alone, but he said the success of the assassination was all down to Greer. If Greer swerves the car or hits the gas, Kennedy lives. In fact, Greer famously, he was interviewed by William Manchester, and Jacqueline Kennedy was also interviewed by William Manchester. She was a witness to this. Greer famously said to Jackie at Parkland Hospital, if only I'd seen it in time, if I only had swerved. Like, he took full responsibility and guilt. And you might say, okay, I always go down the sequence of events. The first shot or shots rings that. Greer looks back at Kennedy, which he always denied doing. He said he never saw sight of Kennedy. Look at the he's looking right at him. He's looking right at Kennedy. Okay. Yeah. Connolly's also looking at Kennedy too. And Governor Connolly, after initially saying he saw him, then from that point on, he said, I couldn't see Kennedy. I don't know if he had some ulterior motive for denying he saw Kennedy. Okay, again, first shot, he looks back at Kennedy. Kennedy's like this. Kennedy's still alive. Kennedy can be saved. He's not dead yet.
Yeah. Then
Greer turns around. Roy Kellerman, his superior, says, get out of line, we've been hit. As you can see, this is Zapruder film. Roy Kellerman grabs the radio microphone. That's when Greer disobeys training and common sense and a direct order from a superior. Turns back around a second time, staring at Kennedy. Kennedy's head's blown apart. Only then does Greer face forward, hit the gas. He denied all this to the Warren Commission. He said, it was after the second shot. I never saw sight of Kennedy. I saw some blood on the governor's shirt. After what was probably the second shot, I hit the gas. All fabrication, but they didn't want to call him out. The Warren Commission. And what they did is they took everybody at face value for the most part, at least the pro-government people, and they didn't analyze and do some good cross-examination. Say, sir, look, we see you looking back not once but twice. In fact, in 1991, when I did that conference presentation in Fredonia, I can't tell you how many people in the audience said, Vince, I never noticed Greer looked back twice. They just thought he looked back once. I said, no, twice. Now, there was gasps in the audience. Harry Livingstone, George Michael Weaver, Robert Cutler, a whole bunch of other people, Martin Shackelford, they were like, I never noticed that before. And that's why I knew I was on something. This is a Bruder film, and those people didn't notice he looked back twice. I'm on something here. And that's when things changed. Greer had all this guilt. He gets to the night of the autopsy. He's telling the FBI agents, sometimes the president ordered us to slow down. The blame the victim thing is laid even that night when Kennedy's body's not even cold yet. The blame the victim mantra. Then it becomes he orders to slow down. It becomes he didn't want us on the back of the car. It becomes get that bubble top off. It becomes all this other stuff. He didn't want the motorcycles by the car. It's all blaming because they don't want to look guilty because there's guilty of sin. Even if they weren't actively involved in the conspiracy to kill Kennedy, they were involved in that. Now, there's more to Greer than just that. That's the actions on Elm Street. He withheld the president's clothing during the autopsy. Critical to have that shirt and the suit and all that to maybe compare and contrast the wounds in the body. As we know,
how was he in possession of it?
He just had possessions of it. He ended up taking it back to the White House garage in his locked locker later on that night, and they had to retrieve it. They had to break open the lock. I mentioned him earlier, Henry Ripka. He was one of the agents. They had to break open the lock and get his clothes. It was withheld. But people didn't think so forensically back then as they do now. Back then, Dr. Michael Bodden, maybe he was beginning on it, but the forensic pathology as we know it now wasn't really adhered to. blood spatter, and chain of possession was real loose and everything, loosey goosey, I should say.
Okay.
Now the thing about Greer is there's a very good chance Greer wasn't going to be the driver of Kennedy. Another major discovery of mine. And I say this without any ego. I work for a living. I'm not in this for the money. I work for a living. I'm married. I have a full-time job. I'm not in this for accolades or pat myself on the back. This could have been anybody, Jess. This could have been you. This could have been anybody. This happened to be little old me who was researching Secret Service. I found out there was an agent who died a month before the assassination. Thomas B. Shipman. Thomas B. Shipman just passed his annual physical. I got this from his family, and they were all also suspicious of his death. He dies at Camp David of an alleged heart attack, October 14th, which allows Greer to be the driver. You might say, so, well, Vince, how do we know for sure Thomas Shipman was going to be the driver? Turns out they have family in Dallas. Thomas Shipman was specifically looking forward to the Texas trip, specifically Dallas. He was in the lottery, so to speak, to be a driver. With his death, Greer is obviously by default going to be the driver. That's the way it goes. Because Sam Kinney normally drove the fob car. Morgan Geist, the head of the White House garage detail, was largely left behind now. He got a little older since the Truman days and that whatnot. Well, again, people always talk about this mysterious death after the assassination, days, weeks, months, years after. This is one a month before. I really think it really is bizarre. I found it out by a total fluke. What happened was no one ever knew who Thomas Shipman was. I didn't even know. I came across this unpublished book. His widow, George McNally, was a former Secret Service agent, became the head of the White House Communications Agency. He died in 1970, but in 1982, his widow came out with like a Kinko self-published, cut and paste, whatever version of a manuscript. It's called A Million Miles of Presidents. In fact, I think you can get it from Andy Warren-Arsek's Last Hurrah bookshop, still has it, I think. And I'm reading it. It's very dry reading. This guy was in the Secret Service or the White House Communications Agency from Truman up to Nixon. And I'm reading it. It's good reading, but it's kind of boring too. Every motorcade, everything out of nowhere. In the sequence of the Kennedy days, he goes, one of President Kennedy's drivers, Thomas Shipman, died suddenly. I'm like, hello? Come again? What's this name? And the interest of the time, it took me a couple $100 to get them. Little newspaper articles in Baltimore, Maryland area says one of Kennedy's agents succumbs, dies, whatnot. And he said he usually drove the fall car, but sometimes drove the limousine. He dies on a Tuesday and he's buried he dies on a Monday and he's buried 3 days later. There's no toxicology tests. Heart attack. There's an old country doctor thing. Well, he's not shot or stabbed. Heart attack. And because they didn't do toxicology tests, which could take weeks or months, he's buried 3 days later. Give me a break. And the real mystery about his death is, which I cannot comprehend, President Kennedy was very, very kind, generous, giving. He didn't mention his death. Pierre Salinger didn't mention his death. No major newspaper article mentions his death. Only these backwater, small one-paragraph Baltimore, Maryland area mentioned his death, and I had to pay money to get them in the first place. Yet 10 years later, when an agent, Cliff Dietrich, died during the Nixon days, Nixon gave a press conference. Tricia Nixon and Pat Nixon went to the funeral. There was a big to-do about his death. He died in a helicopter crash. Cliff Dietrich did. But 10 years before, President Kennedy mentions not a word about this agent who dies at Camp David. Yeah. I mean, he's one of his driver agents. It's not like some unknown agent to Kennedy. Kennedy knew all the agents by their first name, he knew their last name, knew their families. That's one of the things all the agents said. He was very gracious, generous, asked about their kids, how they were doing. Yeah. And one of his driver agents dies, and he doesn't mention them. Very bizarre. We'll never know because all these years and they're all dead. But again, I contacted his family, and Jess, there's an old adage: don't ever ask a question you don't know the answer to. Little lawyers thing, because they can devastate you. The family could have came out and said, Vince, get a life. He died of a heart attack. He had a heart ailment. Come on, how dare you? They said, oh no. For all these years, we've been skeptical too. We can't see how he died of a heart attack. He just passed an annual physical. He's the driver. Think of anything. If he goes, so does the president in the crash. Spectators get mowed down. He has to be in extra fit shape to be the driver. He drove Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy. Okay. Wow. And there's that during when Patrick Kennedy died in August of '63, he was the driver. He was a driver a lot of motorcades in June of '63. But the bottom line, he was in that lot. He was looking forward to the Dallas trip because they had relatives. Certainly leaves suspicion, especially when you find out Bill Greer, who died in 1985. I spoke to his son Richard, and I said, "What did your father think of President Kennedy?" He didn't say anything. Okay, this is awkward. So I went on to other questions. I came back to it. I said, sir, if you don't mind, what did your father think of President Kennedy? He said, well, we're Methodists and JFK was Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And before you catch your breath on that bizarre exchange, turns out Bill
Wow.
Greer emigrated to America at the age of 18. So he was born and raised in County Tyrone, Ireland. As we know, for generations, for decades, for centuries, there's been the
Oh,
Protestants and the
wow.
Catholics have been fighting, and then when Greer comes to America, it's even part of his Warren Commission testimony backs this up. He was a chauffeur in the Boston area where Kennedy comes from. He was a one-time chauffeur for Henry Cabot Lodge, a political enemy of Kennedy's. He
Uh-huh.
had to have heard all the stories of bootlegging and Nazi sympathizing with old Joe Sr.
Oh
Come
my
on. If he
goodness.
heard about him, he's
Wow.
in the Boston area. Again,
Yeah.
his Warren Commission testimony. He was a chauffeur at Henry Cabot Lodge. He comes to America at age 18 from Ireland, and his son tells a stranger on the phone after not answering the first time, what did your father think of Kennedy? He didn't say, oh, he loved Kennedy. Kennedy loved him. He
Yeah.
said, well, we're
We're
Methodists and JFK was
Methodists.
Catholic. And that looms large when you
It's
see the
telling.
Zapruder film, and his first shot rings out. He looks back once. Kellerman, get out line, we've been hit. Greer disobeys direct order, looks back around until the fatal shot makes its mark. Now, for people out there who say, hey, Vince, Greer put himself in the line of fire then. I don't have all the answers. Yeah, you make a good counter argument that Greer's in the line of fire. Maybe he could have good shot. I don't know what the title is. They were just hoping the marksmen, the snipers, were going to do a thorough job and not be hit. And as we know, it's Monday morning on this part, but he wasn't hit. Greer wasn't hit.
Sure.
The marksman did a good job. But the bottom line is Greer obviously had these disturbing feelings by his son. Oh, another thing I'm forgetting to mention too, in the year 2013, my first book came out, the Irish Times, a major newspaper in Ireland, contacted me, not the other way around. Out of nowhere, they contacted me and says, Vincent, that's some information about Mr. Greer you might find interesting. We found out he was part of the Orange Order, the Order of the Orange. In fact, his father and grandfather were also part of the Orange, very anti-Catholic, pro-Protestant. Anti-Catholic. So he's wearing it on his sleeve. It would be like someone who was
Wow.
pro-Trump or pro-Biden. What did they think about the opposition? Well, what did he think about Kennedy if he's a member of the Orange Order and Kennedy was the first Catholic president?
Yeah, it was a big
Come
deal.
on.
Which
And then you
is,
got,
it kind of circles back to what you were talking about with the stamps and the coins. That's why, a large part of why the world knew him. Yes, he was a popular president, but also by being a Catholic, a lot of the world felt a kinship with him that they hadn't felt with other presidents because they were Catholics.
right.
So there was a unique fame to Kennedy that was linked to his Catholicism. Well, okay, we have 4 more minutes left. The Secret Service, my understanding is that right after, I think this maybe the start of the ARRB, that there was document destruction. Can you
Yes.
tell us about that? Give us a look at the timeline of that and what was destroyed.
Yes, it's either in my 6th book or 7th book. Right now, I'm a little faded. So one of these, I actually detailed the specific documents they destroyed. They were told, the ARRB was a federal agency, they were told not to destroy documents. The FBI didn't destroy documents, the CIA didn't destroy documents, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Secret Service destroyed documents. What did they destroy after they were told not to? Oh, just motorcade records for Kennedy in the fall. Nothing to see here. And this is after the ARB was in contact with me many times. I told them about interviewing Floyd Boring, which they did. Doug Horn interviewed Floyd Boring. And I told them about the Secret Service. I let them know in letters and whatnot about my feelings and suspicions of the Secret Service. I donated audio cassettes of my interviews with the agents. In January 95, there was almost going to be congressional hearings. Ralph Basham, who was then just an official of the Secret Service, later became Secret Service director. He was going to be involved in the congressional testimony to try to defend the Secret Service. They said it was just their normal destructive method after so many decades. It was just an error, just an oversight. When you look at the motorcade records they destroyed, all final protective survey reports for Kennedy's trips in September, October, and early November were shredded. You know why? Because I don't even care as a speculation. This is good speculation because it's based on my research. I could take this to the bank with those records being gone. It's because those records would have showed what the few surviving records would show, as in Tampa, that survived the shredder. It would show that Building rooftops were guarded. Agents were in the back of the car. They had good protective intelligence. Motorcycles, a good number beside the car. They didn't want the Secret Service to be put under fire for, wow, how come all these prior Kennedy trips, he had good protection. He gets to Dallas and he doesn't. There's no other way. There's no other rationale that you could say, oh, these coincidentally had to be these trip folders were destroyed. It's obscene. And thank God for my interviews with these agents. Thank God for the newspaper archives that survived the shredder because they were buried in microfiche. Had to pay money to get them. And for the few documents that did survive, thank God for the pre-assassination books written by Secret Service officials that confirmed the building rooftops were normally guarded. Thank God for the ABC footage that day, et cetera, et cetera. So we have all that. Thank God for the motorcade footage that's come out in the intervening years, because it shows a contrast to Dallas. Dallas was different. And then obviously, $54 million question, a man in a building happens to shoot a man in a car. It just happens on that day where security is so awful. Just compare it to Tampa.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Wow. Well, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much, Vince, for your time. Thank you for answering our questions. I loved this. And I actually have your book. And maybe reading from it about Bethesda. Yeah, but super thankful for your work. Super thankful for all that you've done to uncover the truth. So,
all right, just take care. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so grateful to have had this time with you. Thank you for reaching out and for making the time. I know this is going to answer a lot of questions. It answered a lot for me. I know I'm super grateful for this conversation with Vince Palamara, and I think you certainly have to have learned a bunch of things too. Let me know in the comments what stands out to you, which things you might like to investigate further, if you're going to get any of his books so that you can learn more about that, and just any other questions you have about Secret Service or observations from the conversation. I look forward to hearing from you in the comments, and I hope you have a great day.